Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Obesity Canada community. My name is Sandra Leah. I am the Vice Chair for Obesity Canada, the GTA chapter. I've been involved with Obesity Canada for almost 5 years now, and I'm also a food addiction counselor here in Toronto. And we created this Hope series as a result of what was happening with the world pandemic and COVID, and it was all about creating a community. It was all about offering evidence-based knowledge and, of course, offering hope. And so for this series, we want to give you the tools and the knowledge so that you can maintain your health during this time, that you can maintain your emotional health, your physical health, and also be a part of a community that has very accepting and dropped all judgment. So I welcome you today to this session. But today, I want to welcome people from all over the world. Our community is, in fact, global. We have dietitians, psychotherapists, kinesiologists, bariatric educators, internationally from the UK, from UAE, from Mexico, US, Canada, and many, many other countries. Every time we do one of these series, our community grows and we have bigger and farther reach. So tonight's topic, or today's, practicing healthy movement behaviors in a COVID-19 era. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Arya Sharma. He is a professor of medicine at the University of Alberta and the scientific director of Obesity Canada. So over to you, Arya.
Well, thanks, Sandra, for that introduction, and welcome to everybody. It's so great to see that we have not just a pan-Canadian audience, but as Sandra mentioned, we've got folks here from Argentina, we've got folks here from Mexico, and a lot of other countries. So just to remind everybody, Obesity Canada, as most of you probably know by now, is Canada's national registered charity and is entirely dedicated to improving the lives of Canadians affected by obesity through obesity research, through education, and through advocacy. Through all of the things that Obesity Canada does to educate health professionals, support researchers, mentor trainees and students, and works with policymakers to ensure ultimately that all Canadians living with obesity receive the same level of treatment, the same level of prevention, the same level of respect as anyone living with any other chronic disease like diabetes or hypertension. And as part of our series here, we are trying to focus on the impact that COVID is having, that the COVID epidemic is having on the folks, affected by it, mainly by having to stay home. And this is not just the, not just the people affected by obesity, but it also affects a lot of the healthcare professionals. Of course, we know there's frontline workers who have to look after patients who are, on ICUs and in hospitals, and there's a lot of, other folks who have to continue working out there. But I think it ultimately affects all of us. And so today's topic is going to focus on the impact on physical activity. What impact is this epidemic having on physical activity, and what can we do about it? So we have two guests on the show. I'd like to start by introducing Ian Patton. Ian Patton is a registered kinesiologist. He also has a PhD in kinesiology. He's been associated with Obesity Canada for quite a while now. And so, Ian, you might want to tell us a little bit about about yourself professionally. But Ian is also someone who, as he'll probably tell you, has been living with obesity himself ever since he was a little kid, which, by the way, never stopped him from being physically active. In fact, Ian was a competitive varsity athlete through most of his early career, and perhaps you can talk about that a little bit too. It's great to have that perspective on the show. So, Ian, tell us a little bit about yourself, your involvement with Obesity Canada, and your background.
Yeah, for sure. So, name is Ian Patton. I am the Director of Advocacy and Public Engagement for Obesity Canada now. I've been involved with the organization for about a decade now. Started as a student and a trainee while I was doing my PhD, which was in kinesiology and researching obesity and physical activity. I also have a lived experience, like Dr. Sharma said. I grew up living with obesity. I was always, the big kid in school, and I dealt with that throughout. But my experience, I think, was a little bit different than some of my peers that I interact with now through my job. In that I was really lucky. I found sports and activities and exercise and things like that that I excelled in because of my size. And because of that, I got really, really interested in being active and the science of being active, which is why I got into kinesiology. So I've got an interesting perspective there, I think, in that I've always been active and while living in a larger body, you know. So I excelled in, you know, various sports like wrestling was kind of my big one that I did throughout university and high school. You know, did a lot of hockey and football and rugby and all those sorts of things. So I've always been an active person, but have done so living in a larger body. So that's kind of the perspective I bring.
Well, thanks, Ian, for that. And the other guest today is Devin Blackburn, who is also a registered kinesiologist, and she also happens to be the president, the current president of the Ontario Kinesiology Association. So Devin, welcome to this chat, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice and what you do and what brings you here today.
Most definitely. So I typically run a private practice. Kinesiology is really broad in its scope. And movement as science is typically the key. Now, early on in my practice, I found I gravitated towards mental health and movement as medicine, with assisting individuals who are coping with high levels of stress or anxiety, depression. I've worked with individuals who have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, and everything in between. So I find it really pertinent to the world we're living in today with the COVID-19 because stress levels are so extremely high. What brings me today is my passion for providing my knowledge to anyone who can learn from what I have to say. So I look forward to this discussion.
So Devin, let me start with the question, because you've addressed mental health. That one of the key symptoms of depression is lack of motivation, and at times like this, when you're sitting at home, when you may be depressed, about everything that's going on around you, whether it's reactive or endogenous anxiety levels, all of that affects motivation to be physically active. So my question is, how has this epidemic affected your physical activity personally, and what are you seeing amongst your clients? What's going on?
Well, I'll admit right away, my practice had to decrease significantly. A lot of the people I worked with were government related, being in the capital of Canada here in Ottawa. So my work level decreased significantly. My own personal experience, my physical activity level decreased significantly. When you work in a physical active profession, you kind of get to do physically active stuff while you're working. And now that I'm home, I have 3 children and they're home with me, fitting in physical activity has been a challenge. So wonderful question, because I myself am personally experiencing this dilemma. How do I fit it in? What do I do? If I can't be active during the day, what am I going to do? I'll tell you, this morning I was able to fit in 7 minutes of physical activity. And really, I find right now it's about, it's about just being able to do something, not nothing. There's no gym available. Outside is limited. Motivation is extremely low. So what can I do? Well, I'll tell you, I did a bunch of squats, probably 20. I ran up and down my stairs a handful of times. I did some push-ups against the wall, body weight activity stuff. And all of this is surrounding fitting in the schooling that has to take place for my children. They get 15 minutes of reading time, so I take that 15 minutes and I do what I can. Is it about doing 3 sets of so many reps? No. Right now, it's literally just move my body to keep to prevent stagnant energy from occurring. Nothing big, no weights, no nothing.
So Ian, do you share the experience, or what have you done this morning?
I didn't get my 7 minutes in like Devin did, the same way. The experience is very much the same for me, with the kids at home and trying to keep up with being productive, and then you know, the high stress and all the situations that are going on in the world, it makes it a very challenging time to prioritize activity. And I think you got to look at it at just like Devin said, you know, be as active as you can, move your body. It doesn't have to be exercise as we know it. You know, you don't have to go and be lifting a bunch of weights. You could be moving. One of the things that I do around the house now that helps me with stress is I just, you know, there's yard work and things that I do in the, you know, renovations and stuff. So like just things around the house that get my body moving, that aren't sitting at my computer doing my normal everyday work, that allow me to, I guess, maintain some degree of activity, but I'm not going for a run, and I'm not lifting a bunch of weights right now. So that's it is a challenging time.
So Devin, let me ask you the question. I mean, the fact that we're talking about physical activity here on, you know, on this webinar, which is hosted by Obesity Canada, is of course because of the, you know, the connections that we know exist between being physically active and, you know, being healthy. But there's also this widespread misconception that, you know, all I need to do to lose weight is to exercise, when in fact a lot of data shows that simply exercising is probably not the most effective way to lose weight. And yet we do know that there are a lot of benefits, and there's a huge role for physical activity in obesity management. So can you talk a little bit about what that role is and why it is so important? You know, it's not about burning calories, but there are so many other benefits to physical activity, both mentally and physically, that are important for someone trying to manage their weight. You know, what are those benefits, and what should we be focusing on?
Definitely. So I'd like to remove even the concept of weight from movement completely. It's a byproduct for most people. You move, yes, the more calories you burn, and then subsequently, you know, potentially you're losing weight. But movement, and I differentiate movement and fitness from one another. Our bodies need to have a healthy way to be able to move, so we decrease pain, we decrease tension within the body. When we move our body, we affect our brain, and many studies show that right now. So whatever we're doing for our body, we're doing for our brain, and vice versa. Those are afferent and efferent messaging. So when I think about COVID-19 and the importance of moving, honestly, I find that wherever you find yourself positioned, let's say I'm seated at my computer for the length of this discussion today. After that 30 minutes, I need to get up and I need to move. Does movement need to be fitness oriented and with a goal in mind of losing weight? No, I simply need to move and change the position of my body so that I release the cobwebs in the body, so that I keep the machine lubricated and functioning well enough. Do I need a full body makeover? No, I don't. I just need to change the oil, refuel myself, and then continue on my day.
Now, Ian, you've lived in a large body pretty much most of your life. So maybe you can share with us the perspective of what you know, what are some of the real challenges that you might have in, you know, in moving around, being physically active when you do live in a larger body? I mean, what are some of the things that, say, someone who does not have the personal experience of living in a large body might actually be surprised to hear?
Oh, that's a big question. There's a lot of topics there. I think there's two big challenges that I would point out. Number one would be that there's misconceptions about movement and exercise and activity. And I think people who are living with obesity and wanting to be active, a lot of times we get these like really motivated moments where we want to get active and join a boot camp or something. And we get these ideas that we have to suffer through activity in order to reap any benefits. And that's just not true. You shouldn't have to suffer. You should be able to move your body and enjoy it. And that could be, you know, for some people that's going to the gym and lifting weights and doing those sorts of things. But for other people, that's not it. So it's finding something that you enjoy. I think that misconception about movement and activity and exercise is a big barrier, because people think if they're not doing the traditional exercises and they're not hurting themselves, they're not going to be getting the benefits. The other barrier or challenge, I think, would be a lot of the weight bias and stigma that comes along with larger bodies moving. You know, like if you're someone who is going to get up and be active outdoors, and, you know, it's a reality that you're going to have to deal with, or you might come across a situation where someone's going to yell something at you, or you're going to be exposed to some degree of bias and discrimination. And so, I mean, who wants to deal with that? So those are two big challenges there that have to be addressed, and you have to recognize. I think for me, I was, you know, I had the training in the background, and I knew how to do these activities. But when I was working as a kinesiologist in a fitness facility, I always told the people that I was working with that you have to find something that you enjoy doing, and that's what's going to stick. It's going to be things, you know, there's a variety of different ways you can move your body. You can, you know, get involved in yoga. You could go for walks or hikes, get outside. If you like lifting weights, you like doing those sorts of things, that's great. But there's also lots of modified things that you can do with body weight exercises or things that you can do at home. So like there's endless number of ways that you could be active. It's just finding what it is that you enjoy.
So Devin, you know, Ian has talked a lot about enjoyment and the importance of actually enjoying the physical activity. What we do know, however, is that sometimes being physically active, you know, might not have been an enjoyable experience for a lot of people living with obesity. You know, these could be past experiences, you know, even in school sports, you know, starting very early in life. And so that there's a certain aversion to being physically active, and maybe somebody has ruined physical activity for them, you know, in the past. So what is your advice to someone, or how would you approach someone who says, well, you know what, I've never actually enjoyed being physically active. And in fact, when I try to be physically active, it just brings up all those memories of the past, you know, unfortunate experiences that I've had. And so I try to avoid it. And, you know, I would love to be physically active, but it's simply not something that I can enjoy. How would you approach something like that?
Again, with these misconceptions about being physically active, I think a lot of the time we will latch onto this idea that physical activity means you're fit. Physical activity means you're capable of doing a sport, or these, you know, these feats of physical abilities. When I have a patient who approaches me who has never been physically active, we're going to take a look at how are you feeling? How are you feeling? What are you experiencing right now? Let's not even talk about physical activity. Let's just talk about how you're feeling. And if we're feeling tired, if we're feeling fatigued, if we're feeling drained, a lot of the time, the movement prescription I will give to somebody, and this is going to sound potentially really funny, but I want you to put your legs up the wall. I want you to lay on your back in your bed or on the floor, get your bum as close as you can to the wall, and lift your legs up the wall. And that's a first step for many of the patients I work with who have zero motivation, who are dealing with stress, who have never been physically active, who were never good at sports. It's the same story over and over and over again. By doing this one movement, we start to see a different, literally, change in your perspective. You get to look at things just a little bit differently. There's no exertion per se that we notice right off the bat when we do this movement, but what does take place is an increase in circulation. With the feet above the heart is going to be stimulated more easily, and we get a flow of blood occurring into the body. Again, movement is about preventing stagnation occurring in the body. So I want to introduce people to this idea that it doesn't have to be these abundance amounts of exercises or activities that you're doing. I want you to stick your feet up the wall, which is seemingly, you get to lay down, you get to put your feet up the wall. Well, my bum can't touch the wall. No problem. Doesn't matter. I just want your feet up as high as they can go. Make sure you feel relaxed. And now I want you to focus on your breathing. This is still physical activity. This is still a form of movement that would be a wonderful first step for most people who are going, but I've never been physically active. This will be something that you almost do every single night when you get into bed, is lay down. The difference being you don't put your feet up the wall. So now we start to get an increase in blood flow, and we start to stimulate the circulatory system without even doing any, say, cardiovascular activity right off the bat. And when my clients start to become comfortable with this movement, and typically I'll prescribe it to them once a day. If you're having trouble sleeping, you're going to do this before you go to sleep. 5 minutes maximum. I can't last 5 minutes. Doesn't matter. What I want you to do is set aside 5 minutes. If you last for 30 seconds, take your feet down, get into a comfortable position, repeat if you can. It's about breaking it down and having those baby steps. Once somebody starts to realize, wow, I've reached 5 minutes, okay, now we push the boundary just a little bit more. And we take that next step. Movement doesn't even have to be, or the health of your movement doesn't have to be tied into fitness. We don't need to walk a kilometer even to get off on the right foot. We just need to change up the position you're used to being in. Most people don't put their feet up the wall.
Well, thanks, Devin, for that. Now, Ian, one of the numbers that kind of swims out there that a lot of people might have heard about are the famous 10,000 steps. And I must admit, I rarely make 10,000 steps a day. Even though I do leave the house and I have to walk around, etc. Where does this concept of 10,000 steps come from, and how important is it? And is that the number? Is that a magic number people should be aiming for, or does it even matter? What's your take on that, Ian?
So the 10,000 steps it's a generalization that I think comes from a series of the large scale research that they've done with complicated accelerometry and things like that. But it's a generalization. If you're wearing, a pedometer or something like that that's tracking, or you're tracking on your phone, even if you hit your 10,000 steps, I'm going to say there's a pretty significant degree of error in there. So you may or may not, or you might have gotten significantly more than 10,000 steps. But it's just a target that people tend to use as kind of an indication that they're being active. But it's not like you hit your 10,000 steps and I'm good, I'm healthy, I've got everything I need, I don't need anything else. That's not going to be the end all be all. So it's for the general public, in general, if you're tracking it, it's okay, but I wouldn't put too much focus in on whether you hit your 10,000 steps. If you got 8,500 on your iPhone or whatever, you don't need to jump up and start running around your house before you go to bed to hit those extra 1,000 steps or whatever it is. That's not going to be a game changer for you.
And sometimes there are health concerns with trying to pursue, push yourself and have those issues. I mean, I've got so many patients, for example, who have plantar fasciitis because they're pushing themselves to do the 10,000 steps. But then when you look at their feet and when you look at their, often when you look at their shoes, you say, you know what, the last thing I want to see you do is walk 10,000 steps in those shoes. So which brings me to the question, Devin, and this has maybe to do with the training of kinesiologists. Now, you're the president of the Ontario Kinesiology Association. How well prepared are your colleagues and members of your association to actually assist people living with obesity? I mean, what's the kind of training that you think most kinesiologists who work with this clientele should have as a minimum in order to give proper advice? Because at the end, it's as a health professional, we all learn our first goal is always don't do harm. So how well prepared do you think your colleagues are, and what is the minimum requirement that somebody who's looking for help from say a registered kinesiologist, would be looking for?
So the moment, well, let's back up. In our profession, you're not considered a kinesiologist until you actually write your entry examinations into the college. So even if you graduate after a 4-year degree, Bachelor of Science, you're not considered a kinesiologist, you're not ready. So you have to take the competency exams to be able to be considered ready. And I will tell you, I was honored to be grandparented into the college, and I will say potentially lucky, because I have mentored some people who have had to write those exams. I have sat on the committees writing the questions for those exams, and they're tough. they're tough. Our scope is so broad, being that it encompasses anatomy, physiology, psychology, biomechanics, neurosciences. There's much that you need to understand about the human body and all of its systems. Where we excel is understanding how those things work and then identifying via movement what's going on within the body. I would say anybody who has gone into getting to registered kinesiologist and has wrote their exams, they are ready to deal with somebody who struggles with the many facets that obesity brings to it. Because again, we understand there's a difference between fitness and health of your body. You know, you mentioned plantar fasciitis and these 10,000 steps. Being a kinesiologist, I want to take a look at their gait patterning. I want to take a look at how somebody actually produces a walk. Is the patterning within the walk a healthy pattern, or is it unhealthy? And if it's unhealthy, never, ever would I say to somebody, walk 10,000 steps. Even if you are the fittest athlete on our planet, if the mechanics aren't appropriate, the health of your movement or your body is inappropriate. And the first thing we need to do is fix the mechanics. Fixing mechanics of your walk can be fitness in and of itself. You know, fitness really is going above and beyond what you generally do in your day-to-day life. So for myself, for instance, I have to walk from government building to government building to government building. I probably easily get 10,000 steps in. That's not considered physical activity for me because it's my normal. If I'm really sedentary in my work, 1,000 steps could be considered exercise because it's above and beyond what I normally would do. So again, a kinesiologist is going to take a look at how is the body producing movement, not just that you're moving. How is the movement being produced? Is that biomechanically appropriate for your body and all of the given things that you're dealing with? And if it's inappropriate, okay, now where do we have to deal with the holdups or the hangups or the fears that all of us may have? And how do we break everything down? A kinesiologist is going to be really good at taking you where you are and where you want to be, even if you don't know yet where that want to be is.
So Ian, I have a question for you, and this regards to one aspect of physical activity that perhaps people normally don't think about. You know, when you think about being physically active, obviously you're thinking about just being good for health, improving your fitness, improving your strength, improving cardiorespiratory function and all of that. I once had the opportunity of thinking about this and actually writing about this and saying that doing physical activity for enjoyment actually also has a huge beneficial effect on eating behavior. And in fact, I think the reason that obesity management so often benefits from physical activity is not because of the impact it has on actually the activity, but actually has because it does change how people eat for a whole bunch of reasons. So what do you think about that? What do you know about that? And what has been your personal experience? At times when you're physically active, does that have a positive effect on your food intake or a negative effect on your food intake? Because the opposite is also true, that sometimes you use physical activity almost as an excuse for not being as healthy with your diet as you perhaps should be. What's your take on that, and what's been your personal experience there?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think there's always been that kind of positive correlation between my physical activity and my nutritional intake. So like when I'm really good with my, taking care of myself and my making sure that I'm prioritizing being active, my food behaviors tend to be more on point than, when I'm not as active. I think it helps keep that healthy mindset front of mind. For me, physical activity tends to be a little bit of headspace. It has a lot to do with giving me a little bit of a break. So I used to like running. I'm dealing with an Achilles injury right now, so I haven't been running in a little while. But like when I would go running, for me that was my mental break. And when I was doing that and making an effort for that, I wasn't running for you know, the exercise of it. I was running almost for the meditation of it. But when I took care of myself in that way, I was a lot more conscious of my eating behaviors. I was a lot more mindful of how I was, you know, going through my day in terms of my health behavior. So it kind of, that's the relationship I've had. But you do hear that there are other people who, you know, experience it differently. Some people who get into physical activity and start exercising, and it actually does the exact opposite in terms of their eating behaviors. It makes them almost like, you know, they take up grazing behaviors or snacking behaviors, and it's because the activity makes them, you know, feel hungrier or something like that. So like it could go either way, but for me, my experience is that there's a lot of positive correlation between the two.
Well, one of the things one of the lines that I often use with patients, and I say, you know, if exercise is helping you work up an appetite, you need to cut back, because I'd rather see exercise destroy your appetite, you know, if you or reduce it. But there's another aspect that I think we often don't talk about or consider, and that has to do with issues around self-esteem and body image and how you feel about yourself. So maybe Devin, before we open up the floor to questions, any comments on that? What are the positive benefits that you would get from just being more physical activity in how you feel about yourself and how you see yourself, and, you know, everything from self-esteem to body image? How is that beneficial, or how is that benefited from being physically active?
Well, again, physical activity, our bodies are designed to move, you know, and from birth, we spend much of our time increasing the amount or the different ways that we move. It increases, you know, neurological control. We go from, if you observe babies, you know, they move not at all at first, and then eventually they learn how to roll over, and eventually they learn how to be on their hands and knees, and they rock back and forth, and then they crawl, and then they're able to sit up, and then eventually they're walking. I think when we're dealing with movement, again, it's difficult because there's this really thick veil of the difference between movement and fitness. And a lot of us have been blasted with these ideas that you have to already be wonderful. You have to already be excellent at being physically fit in order to even participate in physical fitness. When I deal with clients who are struggling with body image, a lot of it is reminding them, you once didn't know how to walk, and now you walk. And now you walk, you know, every day for a kilometer. There was a point where you never did this. We really need to start taking a look at that difference between fitness and movement itself. The more we move, the better we feel about ourselves, because the better our body feels. The better our body feels. If I'm able to have full range of motion and move through space, or easily reach for something up over my head in my court, that feels good, as opposed to not having that range of motion. That feels bad. And it becomes a catch-22, either positively or negatively for us. If I'm not able to move healthy movement, okay, if I don't have full range of motion, that's not going to feel good. It limits my abilities in everyday life. And if my abilities are limited, then we start to get clogged down with this idea that, well, it's because I'm not fit. It's because I'm not as good as I need to be, because I've been told I should be this good. When we, again, continue to just produce movement so that we're no longer stagnant, we're no longer stiff, we're no longer stationary, the body starts to get effects immediately. And when I can produce more in my life, i.e., maybe I park at the back of the parking lot now when I walk into the grocery store. That's more than I used to do. And if I can continue to take a look at how I'm continuing to improve, because fitness or healthy movement is always going to be continual. You, again, as we said, you don't take 10,000 steps and then boom, you're there and now I'm healthy and I'm done for the day. No, it's a continual progression. And if we can get rid of this idea that it's a destination or a goal, and it's a lifestyle, I think we're going to see that effect tenfold. We're going to feel much better about ourselves because there's no pressure to be this. You're never going to hit that. You always have to go further than where you come from.
So thanks so much for that comment, and I think it does make a lot of sense to me, and hopefully to our viewers and listeners. I do want to open the floor at this point, and Sandra, who started us off, has had to leave us, but we have Rachel here. So Rachel, perhaps you might want to introduce yourself, and then help guide us through some of the questions that have come up, because I see a lot of questions here.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Atkins, and I am the Director of Strategy with the Toronto chapter of Obesity Canada. So that was a wonderful discussion. I've already written down so many things that I'm going to do. The first thing is making sure that I do an exercise where my feet are above my heart at night. Thank you, Devin. So we have lots of great questions in the chat box. So I see a question from Diane. So the question is, I read that exercise releases endorphins. I have never felt that high that exercise is supposed to give you. Am I doing it wrong?
Well, let's start with Devin here. And personally, I can say I don't think I've ever felt the endorphin rush either. That has been promised, and so I very much share that question. What is with this whole endorphin thing? Does it actually happen, or is it a myth?
Endorphins do get released. Endorphins will get released in your body. Athletes, we describe it as hitting that zone, that sort of perfect performance. For the endorphins to be released or to even notice it, those stress levels also have to be low. So again, not knowing what sort of movement you're doing, Diane, if the context is I'm sitting on the couch and I'm expecting those endorphins, no, they're not going to come. But it does have to be a high level of exertion combined with enjoyed. It has to be enjoyed. If you're hating every step of being on the Stairmaster at the gym, it's going to be hard to hit those endorphins because your body is fighting against the chemical release that your brain is producing, which is hatred. So you're going to have to do a lot of stepping to be able to overcome all of the adrenaline and the cortisol that's being released from hating doing the stepping machine. So this is where I find it's really important that we find something that we love to do. And we do that as long as we can. That's where we'll start to see the balance in brain and body and potentially get a glimpse of what the release of those endorphins will provide for you. But you got to enjoy the movement.
Right on. So Rachel, what else do we have?
So also in the chat box, we have a question from Stephen from Malaysia. And his question is also for Devin. Should I refer to a kinesiologist or an exercise physiologist for physical activity or exercise prescription? And what's the difference in the approaches?
What a wonderful question. Thank you for this. This is a question that's sort of buzzing around in our professional community right now. And associations are really trying to establish what is that difference. How I describe this is a kinesiologist can cover anything and everything. It could be that you want to run a 5K marathon. It could be that you just overcame knee surgery. It could be that you're dealing with depression, stress, anxiety. Whereas somebody who is more like an exercise physiologist is going to deal with people who are generally healthy to begin with. So there's no flare-ups in any condition that you currently have. And they are specifically looking at improving your fitness. They're not going to look at how you're producing the movement, i.e. I pull back on that gait analysis. Well, am I doing 10,000 steps? Well, how can we get you from 10,000 to 15,000? Whereas a kinesiologist is going to go, well, let's just take a look at 10 steps and see if you're producing those 10 steps appropriately. Because if you're not producing those appropriately, then that brain-body communication is going to be a little bit off, and you're forever doing a walking movement under risk of injury or harm. So we want to be able to correct the movement patterning first. Correcting movement patterning right off the bat is a workout in and of itself because it requires brain-body communication, which now means a kinesiologist has to effectively activate the brain, have you focus, generally speaking, on the movement you are producing. And are you activating the right muscles in the right way, in the right ratio at the right time, so we can reproduce a healthy movement patterning. Once that's healthy and that's work in and of itself, or exercise if you will, then we would look at, okay, now how do we take your 10,000 steps to 15,000 steps? I might be heavily biased, but I think depending on what your health background is, the safest bet is to be working with that kinesiologist if you have any other medical conditions that are going on.
So Devin, to add a level of complexity to that question, or maybe the answer is very quickly, very simple, then who are the personal trainers? Who are these guys? What training do they have? And what can I, is there any standard there that I should be looking for, or how do they compare to, say, a registered kinesiologist? Or
so again, in my world, we're really trying to differentiate between fitness and health of movement. Kinesiology is the science of human movement. So it's not just about being able to bicep curl or bench press a specific amount of weight or increase muscle mass or decrease body fat. How are you literally producing that movement? And what is your platform for where we're beginning? Is your postural alignment appropriate to be performing these movements? Personal trainers are going to be really good if you're already in that health state. I've got no conditions going on whatsoever. I don't have Achilles tendonitis. I don't have a stiff rotator cuff. I don't have pain when I get up from bed and I put my feet on the floor, which is a sign of plantar fasciitis. If I'm free of absolutely everything, then I'm safe to be working with a personal trainer, and they can get me to my fitness goals. Fitness goals being, I want to run my first 5K. I want to lose body fat. I want to gain muscle mass. I want to slim down. All of those more, and pardon me for saying this, but superficial things that we see when we look into a mirror. A kinesiologist wants to make sure that we're healthy from the inside out, and we use movement to be able to achieve that health, achieve that balance. Then we'll work the fitness component.
So Ian,
I'm just gonna,
yeah,
I was just gonna jump in there. Just a couple things to add. So I think it's important to know that, we're here in Ontario, we have a governing body when it comes to kinesiology. That's not the case everywhere. So I'm someone who's both a registered kinesiologist and an exercise physiologist. I know a lot of kinesiologists would have that distinction as well. In other parts of the country or other parts of the world, if you're looking for a kinesiologist, they might not have a registered body. So that's something to take into consideration. When it comes to the, your generalized personal trainers, there's a lot of really, really good personal trainers out there. But the degree of training and education to get to that certification or exercise physiologist or kinesiologist is greatly different. Like, there's a huge difference between them. Very important distinction that registered kinesiologists or people that have that level of training are the ones that can manage people who have chronic disease conditions or mobility issues. Your personal trainer who's done a couple weekends of training to get their certification, they might be great for people who are able-bodied and have the ability to perform the exercises, but they wouldn't be able to manage someone appropriately who has any sort of limitation or chronic condition.
Okay, excellent. So Rachel, did we have anybody from the video feeds who might want to ask a question?
I personally have a question. So I've had the luxury to be able to kind of experiment with all types of different online activities right now, from yoga classes to working out with a physical education teacher in the UK. And I find that I do these exercises when I commit to it and I make the time for it, I do it, and then I feel really great. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to make sure that I do this every day. And I wake up the next day and it's like, I've almost forgotten how it felt good the day before, and then I can find myself going 2 or 3 days and not even going outside. So my question would be, what are your top 2 or 3 things where I could actually make movement something that I need to do every day? Like I wake up and I think, you know, if I don't do it, I feel like something's missing, and I, you know, I make sure it becomes a habit.
So it's going to take time, because in order to learn a habit, we actually have to unlearn the habit that we previously practiced. In the context of this conversation, it's being active, getting outside and going for that walk. It felt great today, and tomorrow I wake up and I forget about how great it felt. Well, it's not a habit yet. It's not a habit. And I find when we're dealing with habits, one of the first things we need to do is practice self-forgiveness. Because if we do not forgive ourselves for not going out on day 2, then we don't go out on day 3. And by day 4, well, forget it. Physical fitness isn't for me. So when we are adjusting habits, again, we need to remember as adults, we may be in grown bodies, but we are still just like children. It still functions very similarly. We are learning. We are learning. And just like when you watch that child take its first steps and then fall over, we don't go, might as well give up. It's not going to happen. No, we say, try again. You've got this. You can do this. You're going to get it. I know you're going to get it. I know you're going to get there. When we start providing that to ourselves, then we see ourselves go, oh yeah, it felt good walking. I'm going to go again. It might be on day 3. It might be on day 4. But eventually we start to see that new path that we're taking becomes that new normal. But without the self-forgiveness, we're never going to get there. We're going to only have that self-hatred. And then we're not going to perform that new movement. Then that baby's not going to get up and try walking anymore. Self-forgiveness, I think, is the be-all, end-all to producing a new habit, because we're all just learning. We're all just constantly changing and having to adapt. Look at COVID-19 right now. We're learning how to adapt to a completely different world we've never lived in. It's the same with if you've never really been physically active. You're learning how to adapt.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So there's a question here from Adina. And her question is, I have so many anxieties working out or swimming in the gym. I feel judged while I'm doing it. How would you recommend working on positive thoughts? I was once a runner who would do a half a marathon, no problem. And clearly not overnight, but coming to the realization that I could once do it, but for some reason I can't now. So how do I get there?
So a question for you, because you've experienced this. I mean, you've been very physically active at times, and then you've been less physically active, and now you're physically active again. So maybe you've experienced this. Do you feel judged when people see you being physically active, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's really, really common for people like myself who living in a larger body and living with obesity. It's something we deal with not just while we're exercising, but out in the world, right? We get judged and we deal with that bias. It is a huge barrier, and I don't know if I have the right answers for this. I think it's, for me, I think I was lucky in that I had the confidence and the self-efficacy that, I had growing up and building up that athletic background that I had, that I could kind of get through that. When I was going running, when I first started, I was always thinking that people were staring at me and they were, judging me and making fun of me. And sometimes I did get comments thrown at me. I was able to brush it off and kind of push through it, but it's not something that a lot of people can do. And I could see how it's very easily something that could put you off being active. I think for some people, what helps is finding a tribe, finding people that are like-minded, are experiencing similar things, that can give you that support and that confidence to know that you're doing the right thing, and give you that degree of enjoyment that you're going to get out of it. So, like there's various, if running is what you want to do, there's, various online support groups or things like that for slow runners, or for people who are just starting running, or any sort of activity. So it's finding people that can support you and give you that social aspect, so you're not doing it alone. If you're going to go to the gym, have someone who you're comfortable with who can, be there with you, and they kind of give you a shield to protect you from any of that crap you're going to experience. So that might help.
Ian, speaking of tribes and communities, do you want to put in a quick quick plug for something that Obesity Canada has been working on, has been planning, the Mighty Network? Do you just want to say a couple of words about that? And I know it's work in progress, but it's going to be helpful to a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, we can put a plug in. I'm going to preface that by saying it is not something that is actively open yet to everyone, but it's something to keep an eye out for. So what we've been working on is an Obesity Canada sponsored or developed support network for individuals living with obesity. And so it's a private closed community through an app where we have our own community where we can provide support and knowledge and education and that sense of community that I was talking about, having that tribe. It's called OC Connect, and it's something that we will be having launched very shortly. In the near future, we'll be having it launched, so it'll be something that you'll be able to see through our social media or our newsletters once we're ready to invite you all to come and join us. We're not quite there yet.
And it's going to be different from just having a Facebook page, I assume.
Yeah, so having a Facebook page and sharing information is one thing, and it's great. We can share lots of articles and information through social media, but what's going to be different with OC Connect is that it's more of a community building environment. So it's less about just sharing, news articles or blog posts. It's more about the engagement and activation of individuals, getting them to be a part of a community, be part of something bigger together. So it's more about being in, having that involvement. So yeah, it'll be different.
Well, because I have the power of Grayskull and I could unmute myself. Can I chime in for a second on this?
Oh yeah, there goes Lisa. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. You knew it was going to happen. So I'm super excited to be working on this project as well. So OC Connect is going to come down the pipe pretty quickly. So first and foremost, I want to suggest to everybody, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter on Obesity Canada, please do so, because that's going to be the place where we're going to give the most information. But if you've been following along the chat thread or have really enjoyed these conversations, these last few webinars, that's very much the sensibility that we want to create in the OC Connect world. It's going to be real talk. It's going to be real people. It's going to be each of us kind of leaning on each other and really trying to build that community and say, hey, I am feeling super stuck, and say it in a very genuine and human way. And you're going to have a village of people who got you. And we're going to have you with some evidence-based facts that are hopefully going to empower you to then go around and help us change the world, have different conversations with your family, with your workplace, with your healthcare providers. Because we know these spaces in the gallery view are the people who need it and who are going to make the most change. So I am super excited, and I hope I get to see you all again.
Lisa, when I have you on, can you just tell us quickly about your role with Obesity Canada and what you've been doing?
Sure.
Not the whole thing. I know you've been doing a lot, but just perhaps just your role so people understand who you are.
Absolutely. So it has been my privilege for the last few years to be the chair of the Public Engagement Committee. So I've been working closely with the entire OC team, who are each and every one of them amazing unto themselves. I volunteer my time and talent to try and help create this community, to try and change conversations, and to just really light a fire. So hopefully you will see more of me. I've got some great friends and connections out in the world, and I think that we can really make a big difference just by showing up and being a little bit louder. So that's my role with OC right now, and hopefully you'll see my face more.
All right, thanks, Lisa, for that.
Yeah.
And I think it's time to wind up. We could probably go on for another couple of hours here because I see a lot of questions, but time is limited. I know some of you might have to get back to work or other things you might have to do. So I'd like to definitely thank all the speakers. Devin, it was extremely insightful. Thank you so much for being here. I think you really made a difference, and I'm sure that having just listened to you, even I for myself think I need to engage even more with the
I'd love to talk more.
Physiologists and everybody else. So thanks again for taking the time and being here. Thanks to you, Ian, for taking the time and for sharing your personal insights and your personal story. And so I'd like to finish that also by thanking all of the viewers who've been here. And I'll hand it back to Rachel for some closing remarks. And once again, thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to share one really exciting thing with you before we close off today. And before I tell you about next week, what I wanted to share with you is that over the next few weeks, we are going to be sharing something really powerful with you called the Clinical Practical Guidelines. And the Obesity Canada team has been working tirelessly over the last weeks and months to pull this together. This ultimately will empower patients to feel comfortable asking for and also to receive evidence-based treatment options. And these are the very important types of things that we do as an Obesity Canada team. Obesity Canada is a charity, and so we really rely on your donations to help us with these important initiatives and other things as well. In the chat box, you should see that there is a link for you to click on Obesity Canada, and it'll take you right to our page to donate. So the one other thing that I'd like to mention is we'd love your feedback on the conversation today and what you'd like to see in the future. And on that note, coming next week as our topic of conversation, it's the intersection of COVID-19 and chronic diseases and what does the future hold. So we will again have our returning host, Dr. Arya Sharma, and our very own Dr. Sean Wharton will be joining us for that conversation, and also Dr. Jonathan Gabor, whose specialty is in internal medicine, cardiology, and metabolic syndrome. On that note, thank you everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.